Over the past decade, NBA free agency has become the biggest and most exciting part of the offseason. Going back multiple LeBron decisions, KD going to the Warriors, and the insane summer of 2019, free agency was the main tool used by teams and players to completely change the landscape of the league overnight. But that isn't really the case anymore. We are entering a new era in the NBA, and if you weren't paying close attention, you might not have noticed at all. One where stars making moves in free agency hasn't actually happened in years. And the reason for that, of course, is money. Everybody knows that NBA players make a ton playing basketball, but the way in which they've gone about earning those contracts has changed a lot over the years. First and foremost, the salaries themselves have skyrocketed. 10 years ago, the total salary cap for the league was around $60 million. Like, that was the entire salary cap that you were meant to put together your entire roster with. And now there are individual players who will be making more than that per season over the next few years. And those numbers are only going to increase as league revenue goes up into the future of a potentially expanding league. So the amount of money you can make playing basketball at this level has never been higher, and players, rightfully so, want to earn as much of it as they possibly can. It's always been the case, which is a big reason why free agency exists in the first place and why it's become such a big deal in recent NBA offseasons. If a player has a great season and is eligible for a new contract, having as many teams bidding for their services as possible increases their value. That's largely why James Harden opted into his $35 million deal with the Sixers, because his big max free agency contract that he was hoping was out there with a team like Houston, for example, simply wasn't there from other teams, nor the Sixers, due to his increasing age and declining play. And without much of a market, he chose to wait until next year and hope that market reappears. But in an ideal circumstance for a player, free agency exists as a way to maximize their earning potential on a year-to-year basis. Without free agency, teams could simply negotiate from a position of strength, knowing that a player had to play for them no matter what, but with the added risk of potentially losing the player for nothing if they don't give them a fair offer. Most of the time, the big-time players end up earning huge money within contract negotiations. However, things are changing. Over the last few years, the league has implemented new rules to incentivize players to stick with their current team in free agency, most importantly, the ability to earn much more money by staying put rather than by changing teams. This was most directly aimed at slowing down the crazy amount of player movement that we saw in free agency in the 2010s, and over the last few seasons, it has worked. More than ever before, players are choosing to stick around with their current teams as free agents. For example, Jaylen Brown would have been a significant threat to leave Boston as a free agent in 2024 in the past, but the promise of a bigger payday once he made an All-NBA team this year assured that he would at least sign a new contract with the Celtics, even if he doesn't finish that contract in Boston. And that's exactly why the Supermax was implemented in the first place, to keep stars in one place for longer. And it might seem strange to think about now because we all kind of got used to the crazy free agency deals over the past decade, but in the past two off seasons, the idea of star players changing teams in free agency has pretty much completely stopped. The biggest free agents to change teams on a big deal in the past two seasons have been Fred VanVleet in 2023 and Jalen Brunson in 2022. Both are good all-star level players, but nothing in comparison to the summer of 2019. And the past two summers perfectly illustrate the new era of NBA player movement. Big-time players leaving free agency is simply going to be less common in certain situations. If you're slightly less than a max contract player like Brunson and VanVleet, the old rules pretty much still apply to you. The incentive to stay with your current team simply isn't there, because if you aren't earning max contract, then any team with a ton of cap space can offer you as much or more than your current team might be willing to. VanVleet and Brunson are great examples of that. Both teams could have matched or come close to the offers that both of them left for, but they didn't think that it was worth it. If they were both 100% no-brainer max contract all-NBA level players, the Raptors and Mavs would have had an advantage, but they weren't. So they didn't. However, that is not going to stop players from changing teams a ton. They're just going to do it differently. Because even though free agency has slowed down over the past few off seasons, something else has increased tremendously: trade requests. Even players like Bradley Beal and Damian Lillard that seemingly were willing to be loyal to a fault finally asked for a trade. More than ever before, players are asking out not with a year or two left on their contracts, but within a year or two of signing these new massive, often supermax contracts with the same team that they're requesting a trade from. Now, the reasons for players acting this way are obvious. You can say that it's greedy if you want to, but anytime there's this much money on the table, you're going to want to try and earn it. If you're an NBA player and your goal is still to be in a winning situation, get paid as much as possible, and control where you play next, the Beal and Lillard situations are the perfect blueprint. Continue to sign huge extensions and then just refuse to play on them with that team. Why risk losing money in free agency when you could just get the bigger contract and then leave anyway? We've yet to see a player in the modern era request a trade and not have it eventually granted, so this seems like a perfect plan, and it mostly is. The worst version that we've seen of this was KD with the Nets, who had to wait a few months for his request to be granted after the Nets talked him into staying during the 2022 offseason, but that's it. Every other time that a no doubt all NBA player requests a trade, I'm excluding Ben Simmons from this, they get their wish within a month or two at most, and you get to keep all the money as if you stuck around with your original team. Now, the problem with this is not how this is supposed to work. This is not how the NBA has things set up. It goes completely against the system in place. The idea of stars changing teams in the NBA is not new, and it's completely okay. There is an established system in place that allows you to choose where you want to play and for how long. It's called free agency. The benefit of being one of the best players in the league, among many, is that you, provided the team has the cap space, can sign with any team that you want to once your contract expires, and you can earn a ton of money while doing so. However, these players are choosing to maximize how much money they can earn by signing the incentivized Supermax contracts, which is fine, but there's a cost that comes with that. If you want to stay with your current team and sign that Supermax contract, then you kind of need to stay with that team at least for a few seasons. As soon as you sign the deal, you forfeit your ability to choose which team that you want to play for in free agency. If you're Beal or Lillard or Durant and you don't want to play for the Wizards, the Trailblazers, or the Nets, that's fine. But why did you request a trade 1 year after signing new extensions with each of those teams if you didn't want to play there? The system is set up to allow you to pick your team or make the maximum amount of money, but not both at the same time. Yet these players have found a way to make it happen anyway. And this shift in how players change teams has had a really interesting impact on team building, because before, when you could just add a max player or two in free agency, there wasn't really much of a cost in terms of assets. You might have needed to use a first-round pick or dump a young player to create salary cap space, but once you got the player, all you had to do was pay them. But now, if you want Kevin Durant, James Harden, Damian Lillard, whoever the next starter request to trade is, you have to give up real stuff to get them. And that helps the team that is losing the star. They at least get a ton of assets in return, rather than losing the player in free agency for nothing. But again, this just isn't how the league is set up to work. It does, though, in theory, create better parity around the league. Rather than super teams being formed for free from an asset standpoint in free agency, there's now a cost associated with it. But where does this stop? We've seen Damian Lillard request to be traded to one specific team, limiting the value that the Blazers can expect in return for him. And what if that becomes the norm? The players get the biggest contract, pick and choose their team, and their old franchise gets less than market value for a player that they thought was being loyal to them. Who knows where all this leads, but I do know that this is a new era, potentially an era of greed. Free agency looks completely different now, and the old version of free agency simply has a new name: trade requests.